Police clamp down this holiday weekend. I'm Jim Sciutto, and this is The Lead. Here to talk about this ongoing terror threat are CNN terror analyst Paul Cruikshank and David Gartenstein-Ross, senior fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Paul, if I could begin with you, and this is really for the help of our viewers at home. They hear terror threats all the time, let's be honest. This one is different, I know from talking to counter-terror officials. Why is it different? And just briefly characterize the real threat of an attack this weekend.
Well, Jim, terrorist groups have had a long-standing ambition to hit the United States on national holidays. They realized that could create additional psychological trauma. Documents found at bin Laden's compound in Abbottabad, Pakistan, show that al-Qaeda was interested in these kind of attacks, even on the July 4 weekend. But the reason there's more concern this time round is because ISIS have called for a surge in terrorism during Ramadan. Their spokesman issued a fatwa last month saying that followers will be rewarded 10 times more in the afterlife if they carried out attacks. And also there are an accelerating number of Americans who are getting involved in ISIS-inspired terrorism. 15 Americans getting implicated in ISIS-inspired plots just since March.
Right. And David, part of the issue here is that lone wolves are harder to track. If you've got a central organization ordering these attacks, you can intercept communications, you can track trainees going from training camps to the States, but lone wolves are anywhere, right?
Right, it's that lone wolves are harder to track, and also ISIS is particularly good at inspiring lone wolves. You know, a lot of people have commented, and justifiably so, on ISIS's mastery of social media. If you look at terrorism in general, it's tended to be a group thing, because to get someone to commit an act as extreme as terrorism, where you might lose your life, you will likely lose your freedom, it's tended to take a group to reinforce someone's extreme ideas and spur them onto action and not allow them to back out. And social media, which has this basically illusion of intimacy where you can have these feelings of deep friendship with people who you've never met who are in the battlefields of Syria or Iraq. It plays the role of that group, and that's why ISIS is so good at mobilizing.
And then when you mobilize a lone wolf, the good thing about a lone wolf, it doesn't take a lot of planning, right? I mean, you could just go pick up a gun, your car is even a weapon, right? And that's more difficult to stop.
That's absolutely right. And ISIS have basically told its followers in America, attack any way you can, kill anybody you can, and they're directly instigating these kind of attacks now on social media. We saw that with the Garland, Texas attempted attack against that cartoon drawing contest just a couple of months ago. Well, in recent weeks, evidence has emerged they're also now directly grooming people in bomb-making techniques over these online messaging apps.
So you rash up the ambitions. But it's interesting, al-Qaeda was always interested in big, spectacular attacks, a lot of planning, years, etc. It seems like ISIS will kind of take whatever it can get, in a way, right, David?
Yeah, no, al-Qaeda actually increasingly moved towards a lone wolf model later on, around 2009, 2010.
Partly because of the pressure that they were under.
Because of the pressure, but also the other reason is that, in their view, the U.S. had spent so much in the war on terrorism that it was much more fragile than it was in 2001. They released an entire issue of Inspire magazine, which is published by al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, which was dedicated to a plot that was a failed plot. And to them it was a success because they got bombs on board FedEx and UPS planes, and even though they didn't blow them up, they either required the U.S. and its allies to spend billions of dollars, or else, as they said, they could try again.
Yeah, bleed them dry. I wonder, Paul, though, there is particular attention to Ramadan, where in the Muslim holy month you've had this ISIS call, you'll get 10 times the rewards in heaven, plus added to that July 4th. But the lone wolf threat is something counter-terror guys talk about all the time. I mean, is the fact that this is the new normal?
This is absolutely the new normal facing not only the United States, but a threat much bigger in Europe right now, almost exponentially bigger in Europe, places like the UK and France. There's a lot more radicalization there. A lot more of these radicals have gone off to Syria and Iraq to fight. One of the big concerns as well is that at some point ISIS itself may direct terrorist plots against the West. In fact, just last January, we saw a plot in Belgium, which Belgian officials believed was directed by the ISIS leadership.
And it's interesting, you mentioned those numbers. We saw that in France today. The Interior Minister is saying that there are 650 people in France currently under legal proceedings. Here we talk about 50, so that's 13 times as many in Europe. You imagine they've got a bigger threat even than we do.
Absolutely, and you can see that even in foreign fighter numbers, where about 4,000 Western Europeans have gone over to Iraq and Syria to join ISIS and other jihadist groups.
You can imagine what kind of level of threat we would be at if we had those numbers. Finally, Paul, just very briefly, you have the State Department having ordered its diplomatic posts to reevaluate security around the world. Were there any specific threats against those posts, or is this part of the general threat posture right now?
I think they're particularly worried about this Ramadan period, another 2 weeks more to go of Ramadan, with ISIS specifically calling on its followers around the world and its fighters to launch attacks. There's been a spike in terrorism in the Middle East. We saw that in Tunisia and Kuwait, Yemen and other countries, hence these new concerns.
Yeah, any sense that ISIS is purely a presence in Iraq and Syria has just been lost in the last few weeks. You see Kuwait, you see Tunisia, you see this attack in France, Garland, Texas. David, Paul, Cruikshank, great to have you as always.